Okay, thank you. I hope that was helpful, and you will have seen that we're recording the meeting. Please don't be put off by that. It's part of how we capture your feedback through this process to make sure that we get all the comments and views expressed so that we can take those into account in evaluating the consultation. I'd like to pass now, if I might, to Angela, who's the Chief Exec of LPT, who's going to say a little bit more about these really exciting proposals and how your contribution can help. So Angela, over to you.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everybody. It is great to be with you today. And if I could just start by saying thank you very much for joining the session, and also a big thank you for those people who've already helped us to generate the ideas that are happening already, because it really has been so significant for us. But as you've seen in the videos, this is a focus on our urgent and planned care. But in essence, do is to make sure that people have quicker access, that we join up care, we target support where it's needed, reduce waits, and we provide the right service at the right time, and we look at people's recovery. But we need your help, and we need to listen, and we want to listen. So it's really important that whilst we've given you some ideas, that you do take the chance to talk and to give us thoughts about what's working, what's not working, what you think might help. And that's for people receiving services and those who are supporting others to receive services too. We can't do it without you. We don't want to do it without you. This is genuinely a real opportunity for our population to difference and how we can meet your needs. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to the conversation. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Angela. So we've got an opportunity now for questions or to hear comments. If there are questions or comments you'd like to make, then you can indicate either by kind of raising your hand, and I'll pick that up from the participant list, or you can type a question or comment into the chat space. Those icons are available at the bottom of the screen. Again, we'll note the comments if it's a comment, or if it's a question, we'll try and pick that up and do our best between us all to answer it or to elaborate on any aspect of the plan. So whilst I give you a chance just to have a think about that and see if there are any questions or comments you'd like to ask, what I'm going to do now is just invite a couple of other colleagues to say a little bit more about some of the details of the proposal so that you can get a bit more of a flavour about how they're working. Perhaps I can come first to you, John, actually, and just ask you to say a little bit about the amount of work that's gone into getting to this stage, because of course, although we're now formally consulting, these proposals themselves have been built up from quite a lot of prior engagement, and it would be great just perhaps to get a bit of an understanding about how we've got to this point so far, really.
Thanks, Andy. So the work on this started quite a few years back now, and we set off in recognition that mental health services within this region weren't delivering the outcomes, weren't delivering the experience that people wanted. And so we deliberately set off with engaging with service users, carers, existing staff and stakeholders, and had quite a few hundred of each that are involved at different stages throughout. Initially to identify the kind of things that they were looking for, what would excellent services look like, and then later being drawn into workshops together. So we had service users, carers, staff and the stakeholders all coming together into rooms, really rethinking, well, how would you go about delivering this differently? And all of that then has been built bit by bit over the preceding years, and informed into these proposals, which also link very nicely with the national agenda as well, which obviously has been engaged quite widely as well. So we're positive, and as Angela says, it's so hard to engage everybody into processes like this, and we're very mindful that there's a lot more views that won't have made it to the proposals to date. So I think we're still really keen to understand what people's views are of what we got to, but that's where we got to today.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful just to get that kind of context. We've had a comment put in. So Chris has put in a comment. Thank you, Chris, talking about the potential involvement of the community and wider voluntary sector. That's a really good point, actually, and I know that's one of the things that the Trust is really keen to build on. So I'm not sure, Angela, whether you want to kind of offer a comment on that, and then perhaps I could turn to you, Sam, as well, from a clinician's point of view, just to talk about how that might work, if that's okay. So Angela, would you like to come in first?
Yes, certainly. So I think, Chris, you make a really good point, and I'm really pleased that you've made it, because this is exactly where we want to improve and change some of the models of care in our population and for our population, because we absolutely recognise, as you have, that you can't do this without more greater community and voluntary sector involvement. And that's why the plans are being developed with that in mind, because people need to receive services close to where they are, but we also need to understand what resources exist in local areas to support individuals, as you say, children, young people and adolescents and adults all require that community support and integrated approach. So you're absolutely right. We recognise it. That's part of the planning. And I'm really pleased that within our integrated care system, where we're working together around mental health, we look at all ages of mental health so that we can understand how we can connect children, young people and issues that are emerging there into adult services too. But thank you very much. It's a very important point. It's very well made. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. So Sam, I know this is not your field exactly. You're at the other end of the age spectrum, but from a clinical point of view, I just wonder whether there's anything you'd like to say about the relationship with other services generally, and how you kind of engage with the patients themselves, carers, voluntary sector, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, my understanding is that this consultation is really for adults and older people, but the transition from CAMHS is obviously really important to those services, as is the transition between working age adults and older people as well. So we want to get some, smoothness transition between teams, the teams that work already in LPT, as well as the different age range services that we have set up. I think for all groups of people, we know that there's an awful lot of support that can be given by the voluntary sector, and empowering families, carers and service users themselves to get information and to help to, rather than having to come into secondary care services sometimes, if they get the right information and support at the start of their journey, it can often be a lot easier for them. So the principle applies across the spectrum, really.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. We've got a question from Jane regarding integration and how we preserve skills as we develop rather than dilute them. John, the kind of integration agenda is a key part of these proposals. Do you want to come in and talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. It's a good question, Jane. I think that so we are describing teams coming together, and that will involve staff of a range of different professional backgrounds and current skills working together. But it's not saying that all the staff would come and do the same thing within an integrated team. It's about how that team works together. And so whilst we've not fully formed all of the skills development plans, that's stuff that will be evolved after we understand more about what the outcome of this consultation is. Our expectation is that we will be having really good training and development of those staff in those teams, that they would be working as what we refer to as that sort of multidisciplinary team. We're trying to use the best of different people to help support service users, rather than everybody kind of doing the same thing and effectively losing those different skills in the way they work. So it's largely the combination of people that we think is going to be important, but without the barriers of people moving between services, which we've seen as being quite an obstacle to people feeling like they've got a good joined up care and ultimately the care they receive.
Thanks, John. And a further question now, which is interesting really, because it talks to the issue about partnerships with a much wider kind of sense around well-being, around the arts and social prescribing. Angela, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, so again, this is a really important point because again, it speaks to the sense of people's communities and making sure that again, we're connecting and integrating. So in terms of are we having conversations, yes, conversations are happening. And I think the other thing I would say is that within our trust, we've done a lot of work around the arts. So we have done a lot around arts in mental health, something that we feel very strongly and passionately about as a trust, and have a lot of work that we can share with others around that. But yes, absolutely right that there is an opportunity here, Jane, to think about how social prescribing can play its role, because we know that outcomes, people's experiences, their lived experiences tell us a lot about how social prescribing can benefit and will benefit people. So active conversations, and again, I would also encourage people to let us know of organisations that they feel we could or should be connecting with further. Andy.
Thank you, Angela, thank you. So I'm just looking in the chat space, and I can see a comment from Sarah, a really important point about the importance of first contact in crisis. Sarah, the technology is not always great, is it? But if you're able to unmute and or put the camera on if you're comfortable with that, would you like to put your points directly?
Yeah, absolutely. Can people hear me?
I can hear you, Sarah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can see you as well now.
Yeah. Some of you might recognise me. I used to work in the CCG, and I've just finished. Well, I had to leave because of mental health issues after 20 years. So I've had quite an interesting insight, which is why I'm getting involved now, even though I don't work anymore, because hopefully, rather than sit and moan about it, I can do something about it to help from a user perspective. So, I mean, I've suffered with severe depression for years, on and off, which has been diagnosed as clinical depression and managed pretty much okay, usually with medication. But now and again, it really flares up into something serious, which it has done at the beginning of this year. I must say, my experience, having been 100% behind the NHS and worked with them for 20 years, I was horrified at how atrocious the services were when I tried to get some help. So, and I think I'm probably talking for a lot of people, my first port of call was primary care, your GP. And despite the fact that if I hadn't had a supportive partner, I would never have been able to make contact. On virtually every occasion, it was over 100 calls to get through, and then waiting at least half an hour to actually speak to somebody. Now, somebody in mental health crisis is not capable of doing that. I could barely even get out of bed for 8 o'clock to get on the phone, let alone do that. However, if you do have someone supportive, you can get over that, and I absolutely get how the issues are. Once you again got a phone call, the GP they were okay, they were fine. The default's obviously medication, which for me is absolutely fine because that tends to be a good treatment. However, I was quite critically ill and was on a 2-week sort of notice that the GP said, I'm quite concerned. There was self-harming, there were extreme suicidal thoughts. And I was told I needed to touch base in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, again, they expected me at 8 o'clock to sit for over 100 times trying to call to get through, to then wait and get through. And I just wouldn't have done it. And I could see how very easily, if people don't have that support, they are not going to do that. And it was really quite scary because I thought, if someone isn't there, if I didn't have a partner to do that, I really genuinely don't know what stage I would have got to. And then even when you do get the appointment, it was a different GP. And it was quite heartbreaking because they would start, oh, hi, morning, how can I help you? And you'd have to go from the beginning again. have extremely difficult conversations. These are not easy conversations to have with people. You know, discussing your thoughts, discussing what you're doing to yourself, and the lack of consistency, the lack of access. I'm quite scared by, to be quite honest, because if I didn't have the know-how that I do know from working in the NHS for years, if I didn't have a supportive partner sitting next to me, I think that's an incredibly dangerous situation for people to be in. And that's why, to me, that first port of contact for somebody who is in crisis, and you've really got to get real in that, you know, I think a lot of these things are great, but you have got to think these people are not going to particularly think, oh, I'm going to ring somebody up, or I'm going to go somewhere and talk to some.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult for people to physically do anything. Sometimes you can't even get out of bed, let alone, oh, I'm going to ring up somebody or go down to a crisis cafe, which are all great, but it's just that access of making it as easy as possible.
Thanks, Sarah. And look, first of all, thank you for sharing. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to do, and I really appreciate, you know, the fact that you've taken the time and you've been prepared to share, obviously, a very intensely personal experience through this consultation. However difficult it is to hear that is, you know, part of the feedback that we need. And I think before I bring other colleagues in, because we are changing the way some of these services work, I think partly or substantially in response to the kind of experience you've just described. From my point of view, as you know, the CCGs are responsible for coordinating primary care, and we're starting to do a lot of work now that's in parallel to this, really, to change the way primary care access works, because we've had so much feedback now to say that it simply isn't working for people exactly as you've described. So we are starting on that. It may take us a little while, but clearly the situation is totally unacceptable, particularly for people in circumstances such as those that, you know, were affecting you and that you've just described. One of the central tenets of this consultation is a very different approach to crisis and a direct access. So perhaps I might just turn to you, John, just to explain a little bit about how different that is already and is going to continue to get going forward. And then I'm really happy to bring in either Angela or Sam as well. So thanks, Sarah. And John, would you like to kind of just talk a little bit about the crisis element of these proposals?
Yes, thank you. I think your story, Sarah, just brings to home, doesn't it, how complicated this is and how difficult it is as well. I think that so you'll see in our proposal a range of different offers to try and support people who are either starting to feel like they're getting into crisis or in a crisis state. And one of those, as Andy's alluding to, is the central access point. So not needing to go necessarily to your GP, although GP can be supportive and have lots to offer. But there would also be a number that people can ring, which is open now, actually, that operates 24/7 and has people on the end of the phone that are employed by voluntary sector and are very skilled at providing coaching and support there and then, and draw in further professional support as and when needed. So we, on the basis of what people have told us, really, and a lot of experience nationally as well, really see that as an important thing to try and reduce some of those barriers that you described, some of the difficulty it is to try and get the help. But it's not one size fits all, and I think that you're flagging that, really. And so we're describing also those crisis cafes and recognizing that it can be difficult to find the motivation or get through the challenges to get there. When you have presented yourself, then there is a crisis service, so people who can come out to people's homes and actually see people in their local area. And if needed, there's also the urgent care hub and a physical place to come, which is different to the emergency department and the challenges of going to a place like that, but can be a safe place that it can take some time and go through some needs. So there's a range of different approaches that's described there. And I think, you know, it's so important that if you can put your views to whether you think that would have worked in your circumstances and what, if anything, that you would want to see strengthened in that, or how you'd want it to work, just so that we do land in the right place with this, because we are really mindful it's complicated, and we need all your insights really to make sure this is right.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to bring Angela in next, and then Sam, if that's okay. So Angela.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. And again, if I can echo your thanks for sharing your story. It's never easy to share a story, but it takes a lot of courage, but it really is so helpful. As John's described, there are lots of ways where we are attempting to improve what you've described, but I'd be really keen to capture more of your experience. And I can see that in the chat, we've put in the details of how you could contact us to share more of that experience, because there'll be things you've not been able to convey or remember. And I think we would really value that, Sarah, in terms of that ongoing journey for improvement for us. So encourage you to get involved if you feel able to. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. And Sam, would you like to come in from a clinical perspective?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, what I'm hearing, Sarah, is that, you know, we can offer the phone lines, we can be at the other end, but if you're too ill to actually take that step, and like you say, to wait on the phone or to make repeated phone calls, it's not enough. And I think to me, I'd like us to look at building in, asking people that question: is it okay if you contact us again in 2 weeks, or should we actually we should be phoning you? Should we be taking that next step, so that you're not left in that same position in 2 weeks' time, trying to get through again, trying to make those calls, because we know at the moment that the cap that we've got can't answer all the calls that are coming in, and that's one of the developments that we want to make sure that, you know, when people ring, that they get a quick response. But also, it sounds to me it's the follow-up from that as well, that we need to make sure that we're giving people the choice, aren't we, of whether we instigate that follow-up or whether we can leave it to people to do that as well. And it's going to just depend on the individual situation, isn't it? So I think that's important for us to take back as well.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. Okay, I'm just looking through the chat space, so I can see, thank you, Jane, the comment about Charnwood Arts and further involvement. That's really helpful and noted. Thank you. Chris and John both commenting, Sarah, on you know, supportively of your experience and echoing those comments. So thank you for those contributions as well. There's some information there about how to indicate if you want to come in, and some opportunities to elaborate on those. And I can see, Sarah, thank you. You've commented that you've joined the experience group. These, you know, this is exactly the kind of information that we need to try and improve the service experience that we're getting. Thank you. Just circling back around, so Chris, I can see your comments and agreeing with Sarah about the response of psychiatrists when you first contact them. I'm not sure if there's anything further that you'd like to elaborate on in that. We certainly note the comment. So I'll just give you an opportunity if you wish to come back in on that. Chris, hi. Yeah,
hi. Yeah, very kind of you. Yeah, I don't really know whether I'm in the right place, because I deal more with sort of adolescents and sort of young adults, particularly autistic and other neurodiverse conditions. And you know, we're looking to support them, but I'd like sort of more like joined up support with the official support mechanisms, rather than just having to go it on our own. But I mean, ultimately, our people will come to your attention probably at some point in time, you know, and that's a problem. So, you know, obviously a point of contact would be very, very useful. A single point of contact, that would be great. But more, it's about us trying to keep these people away from your attentions, you know, trying to help you out. You know, try and nip things in the bud before they become more ingrained.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's really helpful. And in one sense, you're right, because the main focus of this consultation is on adult services. But that's not to close that comment down, because I think it's incredibly helpful to get your input. And I'm sure we can kind of connect with you outside of the meeting. I can see John and Angela nodding. So, you know, there may well be an opportunity to follow up directly. Particularly if you're happy to kind of share an email address with us, or just let us have some details, we can certainly contact you, and be really keen to get that established.
Put it in the chat.
Yes, please, if that's okay, or separately email us if you prefer not to kind of put it into the public domain. That's fine.
Right, anybody can email me. I'm only too happy to talk to people.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So yeah, please put it in the chat, and that will give us a chance then to follow up with you directly. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
John, if I can come to you, I can see you've put in the chat space that you'd like to share your experience as well. If you'd be able to, that would be great. So John, can I come to you?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, it's not John. It says John because it's my dad's laptop. Hello.
Ah, okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Did you get that? Yeah. Yeah. And my internet connection for some reason is because I've been on this. I've enrolled on the peer support training, and up to now the internet's been fine, but today it's a bit intermittent. So.
Okay. Well, we can hear and see you at the moment. It's no problem.
I'm not sure whether you can hear everything I'm saying, because I can't hear everything that you're saying. So, yeah, I've had to borrow my dad's laptop because, like Sarah, I've had some really bad experiences trying to access the services that I've needed, and it's gone on for years. And it's also the other side of it, like the financial side of it. I lost absolutely everything in my experience, and I'm clambering my way back up to the top to try and get back into full-time work if my mental state will allow it, and yeah, just to try and lead a normal life. But it took me 10 years plus to get any kind of intervention. I was diagnosed with PTSD after many layers of extreme domestic violence, financial abuse, sexual abuse. I'm trying to say this without crying, sorry. I was trying to write this down, and I'm just not used to any kind of technology because I basically ended up with nothing, you know.
Sure.
So I'm not even that used to using laptops or desktops. I've got my phone, that's about it. But yeah, so regarding services, I was messed around with so many people, including the NHS, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, it's just how it was. And even the police have let me down. But now I've had quite a lot of input, but I have been on a waiting list for 26 months with the NHS for CBT. And I sat there and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I'd rather just, a bit like Sarah, I guess, just utilise what I've been through to try and help somebody else, because that in turn may help me as well. And then just by chance, on a good day, like, you know, again, I'm just sort of reiterate, I'm a bit nervous, reiterating what Sarah said. Sorry. I'm not used to this either.
No, look, please take your time.
I don't even know.
You're doing really well.
Thank you. Just reiterating what Sarah says. On a bad day, you don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to speak to anybody. You won't even go out the door. You know, it's a struggle to get a glass of water or go to the loo. So, and then on a good day, you might think, oh, I'll see if I can get some work. But most people don't want to know when you've got a mental health issue. And I know this now is, you know, we're moving forward, and this is a good thing. But during my experience, and probably Sarah's and thousands of others, probably millions of others, it's just so difficult. You don't want to speak to people. You don't want to allow them into your own personal space, especially when you're feeling that low, when you feel like you don't want to live anymore because you feel like you're not good enough. And then when you are out there, people make you feel like you're not good enough. So I haven't got a partner. I had my sons supporting me, but I kind of didn't really want to sit and tell them about the sexual abuse side of things. They're aware that I went through some stuff, but it wasn't with their father. It's like a family friend that kind of groomed me. That's how it's been explained to me. He saw my vulnerability, he saw my kindness, and when my marriage broke up, he just swooped in. And I could be here all day, probably like anybody else could, and just tell you the whole lot, but it's just, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, no, look, well, look,
I'm just,
it's
let me get
really
back to the
difficult.
services. Sorry, I'm sorry. Let me get back to the services. I'm just rambling on
Okay, you take
nervously.
your time.
It's just, so the services I've had Har saw me. They were really good, but then unfortunately, the therapist I was seeing decided to leave. I was with Victim First and Leicestershire Police, and unfortunately, after a few years, he decided to leave, and then every time they referred me on, all these people kept leaving. And then I got to the point in my mind thinking, is it me? You know, it's a bit of a mad thought, I know, but you know, it's just like, so again, you're just getting passed around. So what I'm trying to say is, in short, I waited years and years and years, tried to do everything myself I could to make things work. And when I was working, I was an HCA. So I was looking after people that were dying or extremely ill. I was trying to progress in my work, and I was really focused within my work, but they weren't giving me support either. They just told me, you know, you're not well enough to work, you just got to go. And I had a breakdown because that was the only thing keeping me going, my children and my work, you know, because I had to keep my children safe because they were children at the time, and I had to keep working. So those were the two things that kept me going. And then when work did that to me, I just felt completely and utterly useless and not wanted and not even accounted for. You know, I'll shut up now.
Well,
I don't know whether I've come across right, and I'm just rambling. I'm sorry. And that's part of it, part of my PTSD as well, I think.
Thank you. Well, look, thank you for sharing. I really do. I think we all understand how incredibly difficult it is to just talk to someone about this out loud, let alone to do it through, you know, technology, and particularly if you're not familiar with it. I'm really sorry, but when you introduced yourself, I didn't catch your name. Obviously,
I'm sorry. My name's Liz. I'm Liz Stafford. John Savage is my dad.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Look, one of the team is going to direct contact you to kind of help you to connect with you, so that we can kind of try and support you more and you know, make it a little easier for you to kind of share your experience with us. But thank you so much for that feedback. And
sorry about the
rambling, really
everybody.
key issues that you drew out about continuity and ease of access. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm not sure, Angela or John, whether there's anything you'd like to immediately follow up. Obviously, we've heard that story, and that will have a major impact on us. But thank you. So, Angela, is there anything you'd like?
Yes, just a couple of points. I mean, obviously, thank you, Liz. Andy said it's not easy to share, but we do value the stories. But I think two important points you've raised is waiting lists and recovery focus. And of course, part of what we are consulting on is improvements and changes in those, because this is new investment into mental health, which we really welcome. And we know that that is needed. And what you've described in terms of waiting lists is about more resources needed, but also the joined up care that John and others have shared already. And of course, recovery, because as you say, that recovery focus needs to be in place, and it's individual. And we recognise that, you know, that sort of person-centred care, you know, recovery for one person will be different for another, but the important thing, it needs to be a central thread. So I think two really valuable points, Liz, but I would encourage you to connect with us as Andy described, so that we can continue to capture what you've shared, but also to support you further.
Thank you.
Thank you. And John, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just it's really building on the same theme as Angela's already put across, really. You're seeing the proposals that we do currently have really unacceptable waits for certain things, and so we fully recognise that, and I can see that in Sarah's comments as well, that people aren't getting talking therapies when they need it, and so that will be a key focus. It is a key focus of us now, but it's also one of the things that we intend to address well through the changes we're putting across, and so that's a key thing that we would want to see changed. alongside as Angela's put out there, that this being really built around individuals, and your story is very evident of how different it is for people. And you can't have this service that matches, you know, people aren't the same, and they do need some flexibility and a capability to actually have something built around your needs. And so we've recognized that it's come across really strongly in the development of this, and it's really powerful to hear what you said today. Thanks, John. And thanks, Sarah. I can see John just mentioned the two further comments you've made about timeliness of support and consistency. Thank you. Well made points. And Cami has put some details in the chat space for those colleagues that wish to kind of follow up some further information around some of the CAMS improvements that are going on. So thanks, Cami. Okay. I'll just pause briefly just to check, make sure I haven't missed anything in the comments. Okay, thank you. We've talked a lot, and understandably, given the experiences people have heard about care in a crisis, and obviously that's a key part of these proposals. But there's also a second element, which is the kind of planned care approach and some changes there. I wonder, whilst we're just pausing to allow further questions, whether, John, you'd like to just draw out a little bit more about some of the proposed changes around planned care, because that's also evolving as well. So perhaps you'd like to say a little more about that. Thanks, Andy. So we have, in many ways, we've started to tease into that in some of what Angela said already as well. At the moment, the way that we organise our services, particularly older people that have a targeted offer at the moment, have been joined up better than the wider adult services. But they've ended up being quite a few different teams, and the experience that we've heard today of people not feeling like they necessarily have joined up care, or colleagues not necessarily talking to each other, or people having to repeat their story, that's been an experience that a lot of people have described in our services up to now. So the proposals that we set out is very much about bringing together those expertise to work together. And I've seen comments before that people quite like that, or some people on the call, and to really think very differently about, as people come into needing that sort of more specialized support, having a very individual assessment that's really looking at all of their needs from their viewpoint, trying to then develop care plans and then draw in all that different expertise that we've got around them to best meet that particular recovery plan as described, and then be able to actually work through with somebody to meet their recovery goals and to be strengthening them. One of the key things that we're really trying to promote is about drawing on people's own assets, what they have available to themselves, and helping them to get the most out of that, so that it's a really strengthening experience to come through our services. So it's a mixture of joining up services and how we work differently, so that we do promote that very recovery orientated. And then those services operating more locally. So the idea is to be much more organised around geographical areas, so that we can start to move towards even beyond this, the proposal we put out here, to work closer and closer with the local GPs and voluntary sector, and start to really localise, because we know how different people's experiences are and where they live and what's available to them and the communities they're part of. So it's starting to move closer and closer to really joining up even wider than just the kind of what are classed as secondary mental health services at the moment. It's working much more beyond that. So that's the sort of journey we're on here, and this is a really key step towards it as we see it. Thanks, John. That's really helpful. And it just gives a sense of the scale of the things that we're proposing. It's a very, very broad consultation that talks to most aspects of the way services are being organised and delivered. Cami, you've posted a couple of things in the chat space in response. I just wondered if you wanted to come in and elaborate on any of that.
Yes, thank you. Hi, yeah. So as part of this, it's really great to hear everybody's stories, and thank you so much for having the courage to be able to share them as well. One of the things that we do want to do is try and involve as many people as possible, not just in this consultation, but after the consultation, because as we start then, you know, designing some of the services in more detail and building them up, we really want to have you know, service users and people with lived experience of our services to be involved in them and, you know, help with shaping them. So that's the details that I've put in the chat, is the our details for our patient experience team, who are collecting names and contact details of people that want to be involved in this journey, not just through the consultation, but after the consultation as well, as we sort of look at the outcomes of the consultation and what people want to do. And then helping to sort of put that into place. So please do get in touch if you want to be involved, because we want as many people as possible to really you know, feel that they've had their say and been involved. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cami. It's good that there's a variety of different ways that people can connect up with services and get their views across. I'm just checking the chat to make sure I haven't missed anyone. I don't think I have. Let me just go back through these. There was a reference to services being linked with Professor Crawford in Derby around creative mental health. I'm not quite sure we picked that up. I don't know whether any colleagues are able to comment on that. We certainly have noted it in the chat space. Chris, I can see your hand raised. Yeah, did you want to come in and say more about that?
That was me again. I attended a lecture at DMU possibly 2 years ago, and Professor Paul Crawford, I think he's at one of the Nottingham universities, but he actually lives in Derby, and he has developed this thing called creative mental health. And he's the first professor of creative mental health, along with some guy in Denmark and another one in Norway, I think. And he was a psychiatrist in a mental hospital. One of his patients was a world-renowned saxophonist, and he started playing the saxophone, and he noticed the effect it had on the staff, and all the staff, you know. And this is, I'm afraid, these days, a horrible reality. You know, so many NHS staff are facing burnout and, you know, stressed, and, you know, they really are having a hard time. And somehow he managed to con £1 million out of the Arts Council, and he rolled out drumming workshops in London. Wow. And NHS staff would come round and beat hell out of a drum after a session, you know, and the effect was absolutely astounding. You know, and these are the sort of things I'd love to get going maybe in Leicester, you know, community, you know, beating hell out of a drum or doing whatever. You know, there is a great part the arts could play in creative mental health.
Thanks, Chris. And it's a point really well made. I was only chuckling because I can think that several of us would associate with a day where we'd really appreciate the chance to go and beat hell out of a drum. So it just made me smile, a kind of recognition of the truth of it, really. But I'm not sure that we've got anyone who's specifically aware of the details of that, but we'll certainly follow it up, particularly this particular professor, and really happy to kind of learn more. It's a point really well made, I think, about a wider issue about staff well-being as well, which I know is quite a key part of our ongoing work. So thank you, Chris. That's really a really helpful point.
There aren't any more details. It's up to us to make the details.
Sure.
He diverted onto a dictionary of psychological terms, which is going to take him about 3 years. So it's taking him away from the work he wants to do. But hey, it's the bills.
Sure.
You know?
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Jane, you wanted to come in. So Jane, can I come to you?
Hi, morning. Thank you for letting me be here. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Right, I can't see myself, so I'm going to just...
We can see and hear you fine.
Thank you. As Chris was speaking, I was literally starting to type something in the comment box. So thank you, Chris, for that contribution, because I was sat reflecting on in my experience of services, in addition to what people with lived experience of mental health needs require in terms of the shaping of services, it's actually the staff that make the critical difference. particularly around the culture and the attitudes that come forward. And so I was thinking very much about how, in shaping the future services and moving forward, particularly in those long-term relationships, how are those staff going to be supported? How are they going to be enabled to continue to maintain a positive attitude, a welcoming attitude? And how can they continue to be supported to be creative in walking alongside people in what can be very challenging circumstances? And I ought to self-declare here, I took early retirement from the NHS myself. I have too many decades of experience of providing specialist mental health services. I now work in the charity arts sector, and I have close family experience of accessing services in Leicester. So that's kind of disclosure. And I'm sat here thinking, oh gosh, there's so much I would like to contribute, but needing to keep quiet. So my issues, my points are, I was delighted to hear what Chris had to say, and I think actually we have to pay attention to staff. It's essential. They are the gatekeepers of attitude, belief, and values.
Yeah.
My experience of service delivery and accessing services is that actually services work incredibly hard and effectively in keeping people out. Systems are set up to provide gateways, and they're not gateways of entrance, they're gateways of blocks. So there's something about an attitudinal shift that is required across the whole system, all the way up to senior management, with respect to everybody sat here today.
Yeah, no,
and that requires supervision, active reflection, creative outlets to be able to explore self. And I appreciate that might sound a little bit namby-pamby and a bit old thinking, but I think it's critical. So I suppose my question then is, how do you continue to kind of keep alive the values that you're clearly espousing here? And how do you keep your staff alive when they are facing such tremendous challenges at the moment?
Thanks, Jane. It's a really well expressed thought and a really poignant question, I think. And we're I take on board very much the point about the fact that we put up barriers to access. You know, that's almost a kind of a reflex defense action when you're faced with a very high level of demand. But of course, it makes it worse often, actually, certainly for the person accessing service, and often for the person trying to provide it as well, because we're so busy manning the boundary, we actually forget to deliver the service. You know, and I'm sure that's an issue at the moment that general practice, for example, is facing in very serious order. Angela, I know you've done a huge amount actually on the whole kind of issue around staff culture, welfare, and I just wonder if you'd like to come in and talk a little bit about that. And I know you echo Jane's concerns and comments very much.
Yes, no, very much, Jane. I'm really pleased you've raised it, because it's something that is absolutely pivotal. It's not old thinking at all, Jane. It's absolutely on the spot thinking, because actually this is exactly what we've been doing and need to continue to keep doing. But just to give you a sense of some of that, a couple of things to share. Well, we've obviously come through and are coming through COVID pandemic, and it remains ongoing. And across our county and city, we have been introducing a health and wellbeing hub available for health and care staff, and our trust has been leading that, and that's a really important part of health and wellbeing focus for our population of staff, recognising them as the greatest asset, as you've said, and that's a sort of deliberate support around what we've been experiencing and continue to experience. But in addition to that, in our trust, we've also had a culture programme, Our Future, Our Way, which is exactly what you're describing, a real positive, genuine, deliberate focus on culture being the greatest enabler of the best care, because how staff experience their work affects care. And that's right, and we agree with you totally. So that work has been ongoing, and we've seen some real improvements through that. We've got a number of change champions across the trust who volunteered to be involved in some of that cultural work. And we continue to have a lot of health and wellbeing focused sessions in the trust, as well as across with our partners. And we've tried to do that in a very sort of shared way that people can access, as we've described, person-centred care. Staff wellbeing is also very personal. We've tried to introduce different ways of connecting and supporting that wellbeing and get feedback about what works for people. And we've also had a virtual wellbeing festival across our county and city with our staff, which again tells you that we take this very, very seriously indeed. The other thing that we're doing, we work very closely with Northamptonshire, our buddy trust, which is also working in mental health, so we can learn together about how we can support staff and how we can improve the focus, because you never stop. It's continual learning about what can make the difference and what could improve that. So really pleased you've mentioned it, Jane. Absolutely agree with you 100%. Lots of things we're doing, and we will continue to put it as the central pillar of this work, because, as you say, staff will make the biggest difference, and we need our staff to be compassionate and to retain that sort of sense of ability to through supervision, etc. So couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Thank you. And Sam, can I bring you in? Because I know this is something that you quite like to talk about as well.
Yeah, so again, that maintaining staff compassion has been really a priority for us for a long time, and things have been derailed a bit by the pandemic, but even now it's even more important that we're supporting our staff and them to still be able to engage with patients, still have that emotional connection to the people that they're working with. And for a while in mental health services for older people, we've run something called Schwartz rounds, which enable staff to talk about the emotional and social aspects of the work that they do. People can get to understand each other's roles better. They realise that whatever role they're in, they still have the same reactions, because we're all humans and we have human reactions to everything. And that's evolved into something called Teen Time. But it's something that I, for a long time now, I've wanted us to sort of roll out throughout the trust, because the feedback from the staff that attend, it's a monthly meeting, and they have a bit of lunch and get to talk about different themes and aspects of care. But the feedback is really positive, and just small things like that can be really, really helpful for staff. So that's what we have already been doing, but need to develop, I think.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. John, anything from your point of view to add? Because this is such a big area, isn't it?
I think specifically on, you asked about how we maintain or deliver against the principles we put out around having that open culture and being less barriered, I think. That is, all of what we've just heard from Angela and Sam, that's all part of that, but also widening people's roles really and who they work with. So we've already started recruiting what we call peer support workers, which are people with lived experience, and they become part of the workforce, so employed people. And it has a massive impact both on them as individuals, but also on the change in the culture, because it brings together that lived experience in practice, as well as helping service users with their support. So it's important. We're widening MDT, so this multidisciplinary team, sorry for the acronym. They both in terms of how we're integrating, what have been quite separate teams together, so that they're joined up and they can see the whole picture suddenly. But also going further, that work closer to community teams, working with GPs and the local social care team and voluntary sector. Suddenly you can't fall over the fact that you can't restrict yourself so much, because you see the whole picture, and people have to then find their place in that. So I think this is all part of that journey, which will keep us open, as it were, keep us focused on being dynamic. It's complicated, isn't it? We've all experienced that. We've heard those feedback. But it's keeping that core value of that, is to be as helpful as possible and to be supporting people to the right support that can be out there. So I think these are the sort of things that, you know, you can see some of that in the proposal, and we're going further beyond that to really kind of maintain ourselves focused on individuals rather than service per se. So hopefully you'll see some of that coming through.
Thanks, John. Sarah, I can see in the chat space you'd like to come back in, so I'll come back to you.
Yeah, so I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but it's probably just useful or brutally honest just to put it out there. Because obviously, as well as being a service user, I was a very long-term NHS employee. And I want to say first, I don't think you'd get any employer better than that with the CCGs where I work, that, you know, do everything they can about mental health for their employees. So I would like to say that as a first. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all, but there is still an absolute fundamental issue and disparity between mental health and physical health, both in terms of users and in terms of staff. And actually, I'm as bad as anybody, which sounds ridiculous as someone who's had mental health problems for over 20 years. An over 20-year career at band 8C, 8D level, because I didn't feel comfortable being paid sick. Had I got cancer or something like that, quite rightly, I wouldn't have questioned it. But I was paid a few months, and actually, rather than take the time to get better, I resigned because it didn't sit well with me. And also, again, some people were absolutely amazing, but there is a lot of people who you've worked with for, you know, 10, 20 years suddenly become really scared of you. You know, I know colleagues who've had physical illnesses, and you get texts and messages going, "Oh, how are you doing, mate? How are you doing?" And there were some people amazing, especially my line managers are absolutely fantastic, like Michelle and Nikki. But quite hurt, you know, there were some people I've worked for 20 years, not said a word, because, and I get it, because they're scared. And I know there's so much work being done, and I absolutely get everything that's been done, and it's brilliant. And I don't know what the answer is, which is why it's not perhaps overly useful, but there's still a massive issue with how people perceive it, with all the best will in the world. And I'm saying that, I mean, I'm my own worst enemy. I've walked away from a high-paying job that I loved in a 20-year career until I feel that I'm not ill, that I can, you know, offer what I should offer to the NHS as an employee. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is. So that's really not helpful at all, Sarah. But it's just to get real, a bit of, you know, there is, and it's difficult. It is really, really difficult of how we get over that. And I think you find some people are amazing at it. And then some people, I think a lot of people, it's very difficult for people, if you've never, I've got lots of friends and family, you know, they've never felt like that. You cannot explain it. I think that's the thing. You can't sort of talk people through it.
No, it's a really important point, Sarah, isn't it? I mean, some of my early jobs in the first kind of managerial jobs I had a couple of years into my NHS career were back in the late 80s in what were then institutions for mental illness and learning disability. And, you know, we've come a long way from those days, but it just shows there's still a lot more to do, isn't there? And, you know, I think part of the reason why we've chosen to have such a high profile consultation for these set of issues is because we want exactly that kind of debate. We just want to create, you know, a kind of a more open conversation about mental illness and mental health and well-being. And but you're absolutely right. I take the point entirely. And all illness, actually, physical illness sometimes as well, can be isolating, can't it? You know, but perhaps that's particularly true of mental illness because of the social kind of constraints. So thank you for that observation. And I'm not sure whether other colleagues would wish to comment more on it, but I think just to acknowledge the point and to continue to work hard on getting a wider understanding. I know this is something you do a lot of work on, Angela. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And I think that it's a really helpful point that Sarah's been brave enough to share, because again, thank you, Sarah, for sharing. But there's still stigma, and you're right to call it out. And as you say, even from people who are working in our sector, you would expect to be able to be more able to talk find it difficult. So you're right, and I don't think all of us have the answers for that, but it is about the talking, the conversations. It is about giving people the opportunity to listen to stories, to understand the impact that it had by not saying something, the fact that those text messages that you described did make a difference to you, and the power that people can be supportive colleagues. But I think there's more to do there, and it is about, as you say, that parity for mental health with physical health. And it's okay to not be okay. And the best employees will be the ones that recognise that and really, as you describe, have the supportive cultures. So very, very helpful point to have raised. Obviously, as employees, both Andy, myself, employers, we need to do more. And I think, you know, using your story and sharing that back with people as feedback, I think is part of that. So thank you.
Thank you. And I can see, Liz, you've come in to reinforce that point, and you know, just how kind of intensely personal and potentially isolating individual experiences. You know, the point well made, isn't it? There are no two experiences that are the same. They're highly personal, and thank you for making that point. Okay, I'm conscious that we're starting to get towards the end of our session time. I just want to make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to put their perspective across or to raise a question. I'll just pause a little to allow time to do that. It might be worth, just as we start to, just to allow that last opportunity, just to talk a little bit about what happens next in the context on this, because we are running this as a formal public consultation, so it's not just a conversation, although it's importantly a conversation. We are taking you know, structured feedback. There are ways that people can contribute formally into the process, and there are details on the websites, which I think we've shared with the slides and can put in the chat space, that enable people to put in sort of written responses. We have captured everything from today, so we don't feel that if you haven't done that, we haven't heard, because we have. These will be kind of wrapped up into the consultation, and all of the comments and questions we get will have a direct bearing on our understanding going forward, and we're really keen to kind of learn and hear from that. The process of engagement will go on beyond the formal consultation, so there's a structural element to this. You know, a statutory requirement and all of those kinds of things, but the much wider process of continuing to work with people and to try and learn from the experiences that, you know, Liz, Sarah, you've been able to share today. Chris, thank you so much for that. It really is a kind of continuous process of listening and trying to improve. So details are up on the screen now about some of the key numbers that people can contact if they need support or further options, and we're really happy for sharing that information. There is information on the websites as well, and you can see the various links there, so I hope that's really helpful. I think we're more or less complete. Final details now on how you can continue to get involved. We will be having further meetings. There are phone lines, websites, and email opportunities to get involved, as well as social media opportunities to get involved. So I think what I will do, if it's okay now, is just draw things to a close. I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who's participated this morning, particularly to those who've shared their personal experiences. That takes a tremendous amount of courage, really, to do that in this forum. It's incredibly powerful and very helpful. So thank you so much for doing that. And we absolutely respect and admire the courage it takes to come into this kind of forum and do that. So that's really helpful. Thank you. A big thank you to the colleagues who've joined me this morning to kind of hear that and answer questions. It's really our privilege to do that, but we're delighted to be able to do that. And to the team working behind the scenes, you'll have seen all sorts of names and people chipping in. Sarah, I know from your career in the NHS, Jane as well, you'll know that for everyone who sits in front of a screen, there's a pile of people behind who are actually making everything happen. So thank you very much to colleagues behind the scenes as well. If there are no further comments, I'm going to draw the session to a close. Thank you very much indeed for this session this morning. If we don't see you again through the consultation, thank you for your input, and don't forget there are still opportunities to contribute. So for now, thank you all very much. Let me just quickly check the chat space. Yeah, just thanks. That's great. Okay, thank you all very much. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll no doubt have a chance to speak again. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.